The snowfield looked innocent from distance. From inside it, it looked like a graveyard waiting to happen. The patrol was trapped halfway across a high alpine shelf, with a mountain flattened just enough to invite movement and kill anyone foolish enough to believe the open white was safe. Daylight poured across the basin in a hard, blinding wash that turned every ridge into a knife of glare. There were no trees, no ruined walls, no useful depressions beyond a few low ice berms and the half-buried curve of an old supply sled frozen into the drift. Men were pressed against those scraps of cover now, flattening themselves into the snow as if they could disappear into it. They could not. The machine gun on the north face fired in disciplined bursts, short and controlled, chewing lines of powder a yard in front of any head that rose too high. It was not panic fire. It was the work of men who had already measured the ground and knew exactly how much pressure to apply. Farther downslope, where the patrol would have tried to retreat, two RPG teams held the only workable escape route under observation. One rocket had already struck behind the sled and showered the wounded with splinters of ice and metal. The message was clear. Forward meant death. Back meant death. Standing still only delayed the choice. "Gimme base, gimme anyone," Lieutenant Arlen Voss shouted, his voice sharp but already fraying under the strain. Specialist Hale, the radio operator, lay on his side with the handset jammed under his cheek, gloves clumsy on the controls, antenna angled low to keep it from drawing fire. "I'm trying," he snapped, then listened, then cursed. The speaker spat chopped static in rhythmic pulses, too regular to be weather, too ugly to be distance. "They're jamming us." The word moved through the pinned men like a colder kind of wind. A radio could fail in mountains. Batteries could die in cold. Signals could fade. But jamming meant intention. Jamming meant somebody had built this fight in advance and meant to keep it closed. Up front, the point man was bleeding into the snow with both hands pressed over the hole high in his chest. The medic, Corporal Nunez, was crawling toward him on elbows and knees, every movement answered by bullets snapping close enough to throw fine snow across her face mask. A dark stain spread under the wounded man in a shape too fast, too wide, and everyone who saw it understood the same thing without saying it. The enemy knew exactly where to hit them. Voss pressed himself lower behind the ice ridge and looked toward the far edge of the basin where the extraction bird would normally have approached. Mortar splash marks dotted the snow there in a staggered line, not random, but spaced with ugly intelligence. Pre-registered. Whoever had prepared this ambush knew the patrol's route, knew their timing, and knew where a rescue would most likely try to land if the team got in trouble. The lieutenant felt a memory cut through the gunfire like a piece of sharp glass. Morning. Command shelter. Warm equipment hum. Colonel Raynor Cole, standing over a field table with one hand braced on the map, talking around a leave request like it had personally offended him. Bad timing, Staff Sergeant. Support personnel don't get to vanish because life becomes inconvenient. Replaceable people ask for leave before mission week, not during it. At the time, Voss had looked down at the paperwork and said nothing. Most of them had. The staff sergeant who had submitted it hadn't argued. She had stood there in silence, face unreadable, then taken the denied request back with the same expression she wore for almost everything, stillness that made men mistake her for harmless. A crack sounded from somewhere above and across the basin. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sharp split buried beneath the machine gun and the slap of rounds on ice. On the south ridge, the hostile sniper who had been pinning their left side suddenly snapped backward as if yanked by a wire. His rifle spun once, flashed black against the white, and vanished over the rock lip behind him. For one stunned second, nobody on Voss's team understood what they had seen. Then the enemy radio runner, a dark figure moving between two rocks high on the shelf, stumbled mid-stride and folded into the snow. A second later, the first RPG gunner rose from behind his firing slit, tube on shoulder, and dropped before he could launch. No one in the basin heard a clean report. There were too many echoes, too much ricochet crack, too much blowing grit of snow lifted by every impact. Sound hit the rock walls and came apart. Direction meant nothing. but pattern meant everything. Someone was up there. Someone unseen, somewhere off angle, was taking the ambush apart piece by piece. Who the hell? One of the infantrymen started, then slammed himself flat as the machine gun hosed their berm again. Voss didn't answer. His mind was moving too quickly now, not with relief, but with a new kind of alarm. Those weren't random lucky hits. Whoever was shooting had read the geometry of the trap in seconds. Sniper, runner, RPG, force multipliers first. The exact men controlling the shape of the kill zone. A trained mind, a patient one. Across the basin, the enemy paused just long enough for confusion to show. The machine gun cut off. One voice shouted from the heights. Another answered farther uphill. Then, as if the hidden pressure had finally registered, their fire shifted. Bursts began slashing higher along the ridgeline. Rounds skipped off stone above the basin, searching for a ghost they still could not fix. The rescue, whatever it was fragile. That much Voss understood instantly. Whoever was up there had only a narrow lane into this fight. Limited shots. No support. No room to miss. Nunez reached the point man and dragged him another foot behind a ridge. Hale kept wrestling static. One of the attached SEAL advisors, Chief Mason Reed, peered through his optic for a quarter second too long and took a fragment of ice to the face when a round cracked the berm in front of him. The whole basin felt like a locked jaw. And somewhere above it, on a mountain full of blinding daylight and hard blue shadows, a single unseen shooter had begun to pry it open. Voss lowered his head, breath steaming white inside his scarf, and a memory of that morning hit him again with a different weight now. The denied leave. The silence afterward. The woman who had asked for it. The woman no one had taken seriously enough to listen to. Who was on that mountain? He thought. And why was she almost gone before any of this started? Hours earlier, the outpost had woken under a sky so clear it made everyone uneasy. The place clung to the mountain like an afterthought, a wind-cut cluster of prefabricated shelters, snow berms, fuel bladders, and antenna poles surrounding a sensor site that watched a frozen pass used by smugglers, couriers, and armed cells smart enough to move when cloud cover or snowfall blinded the aircraft. In winter, the pass looked lifeless. That was why it mattered. Men who wanted to move unseen loved places that looked empty. Staff Sergeant Mara Vey stood outside the command shelter with her gloves tucked under one arm and a folded form in hand. Frost rimed the seams of her over-snow camouflage. The wind worried at the loose threads on her sleeve and made no difference to her expression. She was never dramatic enough to draw a room toward her. That had always worked against her until bullets started moving. Inside the shelter, a heater hummed beside a table crowded with maps, tablets, and metal cups. Colonel Cole leaned over the terrain display, while officers and attached personnel cycled through prep updates. He was not an incompetent man. That made him harder to fight. He kept schedules tight, logistics cleaner than most mountain commanders, and casualty numbers lower than expected in rough sectors. But he trusted systems more than instincts, routines more than anomalies, and confidence more than caution. Mara waited until there was a gap in the conversation, stepped forward, and laid the form on the table. Cole glanced at it, then at her. "This is leave paperwork." "Yes, sir." "For today." "Yes, sir." He picked it up and scanned a request. His face did not soften. "You understand we're in the middle of a site verification and route security operation." "I do." "Then why am I seeing this now?" Mara met his eyes without challenge. "Because I was informed last night of a family emergency, and because travel gets less possible with every hour I stay here." A few men in the shelter shifted, uncomfortable with the word family and the flatness with which she had delivered it. Cole did not. "Bad timing." She said nothing. "We are already short-handed in Overwatch support." He set the request down. "And before you say it, yes, I know you're attached, not organic. That makes this worse, not better. I don't pull pieces out of the mission because personal complications arrive at the wrong moment." Still Mara said nothing. Cole looked back to the table, then back to her, as though her silence itself irritated him. "Support personnel are not decisive on this route. The patrol proceeds as planned. Request denied." It was the sort of sentence that would have triggered anger in a louder person. Mara only nodded once, took the paper back, folded it, and slid it into a chest pocket. One of the junior staff tried to bury the discomfort with a joke about mountain leave always becoming spring leave. Nobody laughed hard enough to make it feel safe. Only Chief Mason Reed, standing near the rear with a mug in one hand and his helmet under the other arm, watched her a moment longer than the rest. He had the eyes of a man who noticed what people didn't say. The briefing moved on. Sabotage signs at the sensor site. Increased courier traffic in the corridor. Recent signal anomalies. Patrol route check. Timing. Air extraction window narrow due to shifting weather deeper in the range and fuel limits for the aircraft cycling from lower elevation. All ordinary enough to sound manageable. Mara shifted to the side of the map table and began studying the contour lines instead of the speakers. Most of the men focused on the marked path. She focused on what the map implied around it. A bowl-shaped basin halfway to the site. Broken rock on the east face. A fractured cornice line above a dead stretch of ground no one would walk unless they had a very good reason or a very bad day. She tilted her head slightly, tracking how the sun would strike the slope by midday. The glare would be savage. It would blind average glass and turn muzzle flashes into guesswork. Good concealment if you knew how to use it. Good trap space, too. She had already seen warning signs on the dawn check around the perimeter. Boot cuts half buried beneath fresh powder where no one from the outpost had walked. Tiny reflector shards near a rock face, likely used to mark firing lines or signal position under low light. Wind-sheltered niches above the basin that offered fields of fire too clean to ignore. More than once, her compact receiver had twitched with interference spikes that did not line up with weather or site equipment. Portable jammer, she had thought then. Relay maybe? Placed high. When she finally spoke, it was into a room already crowded with louder voices. The standard route crosses the center of the basin, she said. Cole did not look up. Yes, it should shift west by about 50 meters. I got a few heads turning. Voss, young enough to still be learning how to disagree with superiors, leaned in. Reed glanced at her map notes. Cole said why. Because the center bowl offers layered elevation lanes from north and south. It also exposes the normal extraction approach. West gives worse footing, but better break in line of sight. A captain near the heater said, that adds time. Not much. Cole straightened. Noted. We stay on standard path. Mara let the answer sit, then added, request permission to move as offset overwatch on the upper spur rather than inside the center element. Cole's jaw tightened just enough to show irritation. You are not dodging the patrol because you're angry about denied leave, Staff Sergeant. I'm not angry, sir. No, you're avoiding. She might have argued then. She might have listed the dead ground behind the cornice, the poor approach to the basin, the way the South Ridge could bracket a retreat if anyone with half a brain had prepped it. But argument wasted oxygen when Rank had already decided it would hear none. Understood, she said. Reed stepped closer to the map after Cole turned away and glanced at the pencil marks she had made along the ridgeline. Where'd you learn to read mountains like that? Mara folded her map. For mountains, it was almost enough to count as humor, but not quite. He studied her a moment. That all. She adjusted the strap on her rifle. It's enough. There were rumors about her, though not the kind men liked repeating in front of command. Transfers with details missing. Evaluation summaries too brief for what they implied. Names of operations blacked out. One line in an older file Reed had once glimpsed by accident describing long-range interdiction support effects exceeding modeled expectations. That kind of sentence usually meant someone had done something extraordinary and somebody else had decided it would be tidier if no one discussed it in public. Mara checked her equipment in the cold yard before step-off. White veil, rifle, compact spotting glass, small cloth-wrapped range card, hand warmers tucked near the optic battery to keep the cold from draining it too fast. Fewer rounds than she wanted, because resupply on mountain routes was a negotiation with weight and chance. The cracked cover on the spotting scope got a final wipe. Her magazines had tape on the lower edges to deaden sound. Everything was simple, clean, and used. As the patrol assembled, she noticed the ravens. They lifted from the south ridge one after another, not in a burst, but in a sequence, moving along the rock as if something below them had disturbed each section of shelter in turn. Men in hides, men settling, men waiting. Lieutenant Voss followed her gaze. You seeing something? Maybe. That answer made him uneasy because it wasn't vague. It was careful. The patrol order formed. Infantry security, medic, radio operator, Voss in command, 2 attached SEAL advisors for the sensor inspection, then the rest of the support element. Reed moved with the easy, compact confidence of someone too experienced to show off. The second SEAL, Petty Officer Danner, said little and watched everything. They were there to evaluate the site after recent sabotage attempts, not lead a firefight. But Mountains didn't care what men had come for. Cole stepped out long enough to repeat the obvious. Stay on schedule, verify the site, keep comms checks regular, be back inside the extraction window. Mara said nothing. She tucked the denied leave request deeper into her pocket and fell in. The first stretch out of the outpost was narrow, wind-scoured, and ordinary enough to trick lesser instincts into sleeping. Boots crunched through crust. Breath plumed. Gear clicked softly under tape and cloth. The day stayed brutally bright, all pale blue sky and merciless snow glare. Men moved more easily in weather like that because they could see. They forgot visibility worked both ways. At the edge of the basin, Mara slowed just enough to study the far slopes through her glass. Nothing obvious moved. That was the problem. Terrain like this always held signs if men were honest enough to look. The absence of visible life across so many strong positions was its own sign. Still want the west line? Voss asked quietly. Yes. He glanced back toward the column, toward timing, authority, expectation, toward all the small chains that made men step where they no longer wanted to step. We're committed. No, Mara said. You're obedient. That landed harder than she meant it to, and she saw him absorb it. Then the column started down into the basin. Mara let the others pull ahead and drifted toward the higher spur under the cover of routine overwatch movement. No one stopped her. To anyone watching casually, she was just doing attachment work from the flank, exactly the sort of support Task Command had dismissed as secondary. She knelt behind a rough lip of stone, raised her glass, and looked over the broad white sweep below. The patrol was moving into the center of the bowl. The sensor site sat beyond the far rise. The ridges on both sides remained still. And then she saw it. Not motion first. Intention. A rifle barrel too carefully shadowed under rock. A man low behind a signal mirror shard. Another shape farther back, avoiding the patrol's command bag with almost comical care. Not aiming to obliterate. Aiming to isolate. To pin. To seize. The spacing was too good. The timing too precise. This was not a group of angry fighters waiting to hit a passing patrol for the sake of blood. They wanted something. The patrol. The gear. The codes. Maybe the attached advisors. Maybe all of it. Mara lowered the glass, eyes narrowing against the glare. Below her, the first men were already stepping into the worst ground on the mountain. The basin pretended to be harmless for almost 30 seconds. That was all it took. Boots broke through crust with dry, snapping sounds. The patrol spread slightly, spacing by habit, eyes moving, barrels up. The bright daylight lied to them. It made distance feel manageable and danger feel visible. The men could see across the white. That made them feel as if they would be able to see the attack when it came. The first shot was a single, precise crack that barely seemed real until the lead scout pitched forward face first into the snow. For one impossible beat, there was silence. Then the machine gun opened from the north ridge and stitched a black, violent line across the basin in front of the patrol, kicking up fountains of powder and forcing every man to dive where he stood. The trap slammed shut all at once. Contact! North ridge, someone shouted. South too. Another voice answered as rounds began striking from a second elevation. Mara was already behind her rifle, tracking lanes, identifying shapes, forcing her breathing down into the cold. Through the glass, the basin transformed from empty white into a fully built kill box. Enemy positions layered from different heights. Sniper and spotter south. Machine gun north. RPG lane covering the retreat gap downslope. Movement farther back. More than random fighters. More than luck. Men had prepared this with patience. Below, Hale clawed at the radio and got nothing but those ugly pulses of static. Nunez crawled to the fallen scout. Voss tried to orient the team and got cut off by a mortar round that landed short with a hard, concussive thump, spraying the front of the formation with ice chunks. Arranging shot. The next landed closer. Mara scanned higher, following the logic backward. Mortar observer somewhere with sight into the basin and enough discipline to walk fire tight. Jammer likely on the heights behind him. Maybe offset. Maybe protected. Reed rose just enough to glass the south ridge and snapped down again as a near-miss shattered ice beside his face. Spotter pair, he shouted. Left of the black seam. Good. He saw the same network she did. The patrol's position worsened by the second. One dead or dying point man. Medic exposed. Radio jammed. Mortars adjusting. Retreat lane blocked. Extraction window shrinking with every delay. Men pinned in bright daylight with hostile high ground on both sides. There was no single problem to solve. There were 6, maybe 8, all stacking. Mara kept herself from firing. Not yet. The urge to shoot first was for average shooters. Great ones waited until the shot solved more than one thing. Her optic flickered once as the battery stuttered in the cold. She steadied it with a slow breath and a tiny adjustment of the warmer tucked beneath the housing. On the basin floor, one soldier began firing too fast, rounds skipping uselessly into stone. Another reached for a reload and fumbled the magazine into powder. Voss saw it, and new morale was starting to split under pressure. Fear always expressed itself through hands first. Mara ignored the noise and watched behavior. The sniper pair was pinning leaders. The machine gun was fixing the body of the patrol in place. The RPG team controlled retreat. Mortars punished any cover that lasted too long. The jammer isolated them from help. And farther back, hugging dead ground, a maneuver element was closing with ugly caution, careful of the radio pack and the command bag. Not annihilation. Capture. Exploit. She saw one enemy rifleman deliberately shift his barrel off Hale's radio kit and instead hose the snow around him, keeping him down without ruining the equipment. That confirmed it. They wanted the data, the codes, whatever lived in the command materials and the sensor site links. A small drone rose beyond the ridge, its silhouette crooked and ugly against the white glare, searching in short arcs. The enemy had more resources than anyone at the outpost had predicted. Mara found the south ridge spotter first. Easier angle, less protected. The spotter leaned toward the sniper, one gloved hand on a rock, body language calm because he still believed the basin was sealed. Mara exhaled halfway, held, and pressed. The recoil came straight back into her shoulder. The report vanished into the larger violence below. Through the optic, she saw the spotter collapse sideways. She moved immediately, already shifting a fraction to where the sniper would expose himself next. Confusion always made trained men check the wrong thing first. The hostile sniper looked toward his partner instead of toward the possibility of a counterangle. Mara fired again. The sniper went backward off the ridge. That was the beginning of the ghost in the basin, though no one below knew it yet. She reevaluated instantly. No pause. No satisfaction. The radio runner was moving between rocks above the central line. Head ducked, trying to relay adjustments or warnings. She took him as he crossed a strip of hard-packed snow. Then the first RPG gunner rose, tube on shoulder, preparing to hammer the retreat lane and finish locking the team in place. She hit him before the rocket left the rail. Below, the patrol's world changed without explanation. The enemy felt it too. Voices rose from the heights. The machine gun shifted uphill in uncertain bursts. Men started searching for the new threat. But Mara had chosen to hide with a narrow lane and good rock discipline. They could guess direction. They could not fix her. Yet, because good enemies adapted. She saw it happen almost at once. Suppression expanded along likely ridgeline hides. A pair of fighters detached from the rear and moved into a dead gully that would let them climb toward her with partial cover. The drone altered course. Time shortened. Voss, pinned below, looked up as another burst chewed snow off the stone above the basin. He couldn't see her, but he saw the effect. Sniper gone. Runner gone. RPG down. The pattern was too clean to be accidental. Whoever you are, he muttered under his breath, not sure if he was talking to God, luck, or the mountain itself. Keep going. Mara stayed on the glass. She could remain where she was and get maybe 2 more good shots before the climbers or the drone tightened the noose. Or she could move. The move would be insane. Full daylight. Exposed snow and ice. Thin route behind a broken cornice she had only inferred from the contour lines and the morning light. Stay and die slowly. Move and maybe become useful again. There were moments in combat when bravery had nothing to do with it. This was one of them. She was not choosing courage. She was choosing arithmetic. She backed off the rifle, packed what mattered, and prepared to cross a piece of mountain no sane person would try under active fire. The first rounds in her old hide struck before she had taken 3 steps. She did not look back. The traverse began with a belly slide behind a fractured cornice where wind had carved a lip of blue-white ice over a hidden seam in the slope. From below it would look like nothing. From above it felt like crawling along the edge of a broken glass bottle with a 1,000-foot fall onto the far side. Mara moved with her body low and her breathing quieter than the battle deserved. She stripped weight as she went. A spare pouch of non-essential gear dropped into the snow and vanished. She kept the rifle, the compact spotting glass, 2 full magazines, 1 partial, the sidearm, the radio that still hissed with useless static, and the range car materials. Everything else became negotiable. Below her, the fight kept grinding forward. The machine gun ripped controlled bursts across the basin. Nunez was now working on a second casualty. Voss was forcing fire discipline by grabbing one man's shoulder and physically pushing his muzzle down between controlled bursts. Reed and Danner had redistributed sectors, trying to make the pinned shape of the patrol less vulnerable to panic. The mountain around Mara stayed terribly calm. That was the worst part of alpine combat. The land did not reflect your urgency. The sky remained clear. The snow stayed bright. The ridges held their shadows. Men bled and screamed in a world that looked like it should belong to silence. An instructor's voice surfaced from years before, not as a flashback framed in memory, but as something her body had never forgotten. Long-range work is not marksmanship first. It is patience. It is relocation. It is reading what frightened people will do before they do it. She used the light itself as cover. Every time surface crystals lifted in the wind and flashed across the slope, she moved a little. Every time the sun glared off the ice and flattened contrast, she crossed another body length. Daylight could expose you if you fought it. It could hide you if you understood what other eyes were trying and failing to process. Then the crush sheared. Her left boot punched through a weak section near the seam, and a fan of loose snow poured down the face below her in a soft, rushing slide. Mara froze. A movement in the gully answered. One of the climbers below had seen it. He didn't know exactly what he had seen, but he knew enough. He shifted upward faster, rifle tight, using rock and shadow with the grim competence of a man told to hunt a threat above his pay grade. Mara slipped off the rifle sling and drew the sidearm instead. At this distance and angle, the long gun would be clumsy. She waited flat against the ice, pulse steady, cheek cold against the mountain. The climber's helmet rose first over a lip of stone, then one shoulder, then the barrel. Mara fired once into the narrow space where face met cover. The suppressed shot sounded tiny against the basin below. The man jerked backward, boots scrabbling, and slid into a shadowed cut. She caught a strap on his vest with one gloved hand long enough to keep the body from tumbling openly down the slope. No warning, no shout, no visible fall. She let him settle into the darkness and moved again. The second climber, somewhere lower, slowed. Smarter now, cautious. That would help in the short term and threaten her in the long one. A careful hunter took more time, but he often survived long enough to matter. Mara reached the higher notch she had been gambling on and felt the whole battle reassemble under her. From this angle, the enemy network unfolded with terrible clarity. Mortar observer near a triangular rock shoulder. Jammer relay tucked behind a low basalt tooth. Power source partly exposed. Drone operator close to a thin antenna mast. Head tilted upward between control inputs. Maneuver element stage behind a black outcrop, facing the sensor site approach. Machine gun nest north. Remaining RPG team lower south. Patrol pinned below, exactly where the basin wanted them. And behind it all, a commander. Not loud, not waving men around. Just a dark figure with better posture than the rest, checking the route to the sensor site more often than the basin itself. Watching not for slaughter, but for progress. That told her more than intercepted signals could have. The real objective lay beyond the trap patrol. Blind the corridor. Take codes. Break the site. Maybe film the destruction or the capture of attached special operators for propaganda afterward. Blood and spectacle. Information and symbolism. Efficient. Mara tested the radio against the rock, using the terrain to mask part of the jammer's angle. Static, then a tremor beneath it. Not enough. Maybe later if the relay weakened. Maybe one burst. One phrase. Her optic cover finally cracked loose and fell away, leaving the lens exposed to glare and ice dust. She swore once under her breath, then stopped wasting air on it. She wrapped cloth around part of the housing, built a quick improvised shade, and pulled a pencil stub from a sleeve pocket. On a strip of cloth tape over her forearm, she sketched a fast-range card. Mortar observer. Jammer power. Drone operator. RPG lower south. Machine gun north. Commander. Small numbers. Wind notes. Angles. One circle around the shot she would save for the precise second it mattered most. Below, a man screamed for a medic and got told to hold pressure and wait. Another burst from the machine gun shredded the crest of a drift over Reed's head. Time was collapsing. For one instant, with her pencil pressed to cloth in her cheek against the rifle stock, Mara thought of the leave request in her pocket, of the call that had reached her too late the night before, of a parent fading in a room far from this mountain, perhaps already gone by now, perhaps not. The grief was there, solid as stone. She set it beside her instead of inside her. Function first, feeling later if later came. Then she settled into the notch, breathed once, and began to take the ambush apart for real. The first shot of the reversal was for the mortar observer. Not because he was the most glamorous target. Not because he posed the nearest threat to her personally. Because indirect fire was what turned cover into an expiration date. As long as he could correct splash, the patrol below had nowhere to survive, only places to die in order. He leaned from behind his rock, one hand raised slightly as he tracked the latest impact spread in the basin. Mara fired. He folded over the stone and disappeared. Far below, the patrol felt the difference almost before they understood it. The next mortar correction never came. The echo faded without a follow-up. Men who had been bracing for the next impact looked up in confusion. The enemy noticed too. Two voices called from the ridge. Search intensified. Mara was already shifting to the relay. She had no clean angle on the jammer operator himself, but the battery pack feeding the setup sat just exposed enough beside the basalt tooth. Smaller target. Harder shot. Better payoff. She pressed the trigger and saw the battery rupture in a spitting flash of dark fragments and white snow. On the basin floor, Hale's radio changed from dead pulsing static to ragged hiss. He stared at it as if resurrection had arrived through cheap electronics. I've got a break. I've got. Mara thumbed her transmitter and shoved a burst through the opening. South gap. Smoke. Move on my mark. Multiple enemy. Sight is objective. Static ate half of it. The rest reached Voss in broken pieces. South gap. Smoke. Move. Objective. That was enough. The lieutenant looked at Reed. Reed looked back once and nodded. Neither man asked who had sent it. Competence had a way of making introductions unnecessary. Mara shifted to the drone operator next. He was harder to spot now that he knew something had changed. But men controlling drones always betrayed themselves eventually. Their heads moved differently. Their posture stayed slightly removed from the firing rhythm around them. He glanced up once more, perhaps trying to reacquire the hidden shooter before the machine below him drifted too wide. Mara fired. The operator slumped beside the antenna mast. The drone, suddenly ownerless, tilted, climbed stupidly, and vanished behind rock. Below, Reed let out one breath through his teeth. "That isn't luck," he said. "No," Danner answered, eyes narrow behind his optic. "It isn't." Voss was already reorganizing sectors, his fear now forced into structure by the pattern above. "Save your rounds. Control pairs. Watch South Gap." Mara found the nearer RPG team. The gunner had replaced the dead launcher with help from a loader hugging close behind a rock slit. Easy temptation was to take the man with the tube first. Smarter work was to remove the rhythm. She shot the loader through the shoulder line and neck as he leaned in, turning him into dead weight and confusion. The gunner twisted, instinctively reaching to recover the tube and the fallen assistant at the same time. Her second shot took him before he could choose. The result was immediate and wonderfully practical. The retreat lane was still dangerous, but no longer sealed by explosive certainty. In the basin, Nunez and one of the infantrymen dragged the worst casualty toward a deeper drift while smoke popped low and spread thin in the dry air. It was the first movement that looked like control instead of panic. That was when the enemy adapted hard. The commander stopped managing from relative stillness and began issuing faster, sharper signals. The machine gun traversed and hammered the general region of Mara's notch. Heavy rounds smashed rock near her face. A fragment cut her cheek open and ran warm under the cold. Another impact slammed splinters into her rifle stock hard enough to remind her that dominance and safety had never been the same thing. At the same time, a flank element broke from cover and drove upslope toward her zone. Mara did not rush her next shot. She slowed down instead. Panic expected rhythm. Great shooters broke it. She let silence stretch after the impacts around her. Men across the ridge began to wonder if they had suppressed her. Heads rose. Bodies shifted. Questions entered the enemy line. The second RPG team was trying to reposition lower for a cross shot into the patrol's new cover. Against the pure white, they looked briefly obvious. Two dark figures carrying too much shape across too open a slope. Mara took the assistant first, forcing the gunner to turn and drag dead weight. That hesitation exposed the rest of him. She shot him through it. Below, Reed saw the opening and hit Voss's shoulder. "Now!" Bound left. The lieutenant shouted the move, and this time the patrol obeyed with purpose. Smoke and covering fire. 2 men up. 2 men moving the wounded. Reed and Danner laying disciplined bursts into the outcrop staging area. The line shifted from desperate survival toward tactical problem-solving. Then the machine gun caught the motion. Rounds tore across the new path, walking directly onto the moving pair with the casualty between them. One stumbled. Nunez threw herself lower behind the drag line. Mara had already found the nest. Assistant gunner first. The belt feed stuttered. Leg gunner next, as he leaned to correct and overexposed his shoulder and jaw. The machine gun fell silent. The patrol completed the bound. Down in the basin, men who had felt hunted minutes earlier now felt the first edge of initiative. Not victory, not safety, but motion. The most precious thing in a kill zone was never bravery. It was regained choice. Enemy cohesion frayed. Fire lost synchronization. Small groups acted before orders reached them, but not all of them. Beyond the basin, the compact assault element was still edging toward the sensor site. If they reached it, the broader mission could still succeed. The ambush could fail, and the day could still belong to them. Mara tracked the commander through the glass and saw the whole shape at last. He wasn't protecting his men. He was managing outcome. This had been a timed seizure operation from the start. Capture the patrol's data and codes. Destroy the surveillance node. Record the defeat of a mixed element that included special operations personnel. Use the footage for recruitment, intimidation, proof of reach. Tactical and symbolic damage in one bright white package. She had him now, clear enough to kill. She did not shoot. A dead commander too early could create chaos that scattered fighters in unhelpful directions. A living commander at the wrong moment kept men exposed, dependent, waiting for the next signal. So Mara held. Below her, movement in the dead gully tightened the clock. One of the flankers had found the body of the climber she had stopped earlier. She saw the shock ripple through his posture, then the instant understanding as his rifle snapped upward toward her zone. There was no more hiding the general area now. Rounds cracked upward blind from below. Across the basin, suppression intensified. Mara was hunted from beneath and bracketed from across. Seconds, not minutes. She rolled half a body length, found the lead flanker through a slit between rocks, and took the shot steeply downward. The angle was ugly and the hold felt wrong until the recoil proved it right. The man crumpled backward into the gully. The remaining flanker ducked and fired uphill in fast, angry bursts. At the same time, the commander moved. He stepped onto a flat rock above the outcrop, arm lifting to signal survivors toward the sensor site and reform the line before air or support could close the mountain around them. That was the moment Mara had circled on the cloth tape. Wind crossed the notch. Glare flashed off exposed ice dust. The commander's movement was slightly erratic, his body turning as he shouted. Mara breathed in, out, and let the world narrow to one dark shape above a sea of white. Then she pressed. The commander dropped in full view of his own men. The effect was immediate and larger than the death itself. Orders stopped. Motion hesitated. Heads turned the wrong way. Fighters who had been acting as parts of a machine became individual men again, each calculating his own chances instead of the mission's. Coordination collapsed into survival. Reed saw it first from below. They're breaking. Voss didn't waste the opportunity. Push. Reclaim the lane. Move. The patrol surged in controlled bounds. Not a charge, not a panic retreat. A disciplined reclaiming of ground that had belonged to the enemy 10 seconds before. Danner fired into the staging outcrop. Nunez moved the wounded with help. Hale kept the half-restored radio alive long enough to spit a contact fragment back toward the outpost. Support began moving from above, though the extraction window was now a closing blade. The bird could not wait forever. Snow glare complicated approach. Fuel made everything cruel. Mara kept working. With the commander down, average shooters might have chased fleeing men. She returned to the ladder instead. A surviving relay man trying to reassemble part of the jamming setup behind the broken battery. An ammunition carrier crawling to feed a stubborn resistance pocket. A marksman edging toward a side ledge to rebuild the kill angle into the patrol's new route. One by one, she removed them. Her last long shot of the fight hit the relay man just as he got one hand on the backup line. The mountain kept its breath. No new static wave returned. No second lock sealed the basin. The patrol withdrew the wounded and sensitive gear in hard, ugly, disciplined bounds. They were no longer prey. They were still not safe. A few enemy survivors broke contact and vanished downslope, carrying failure with them. Only then did Mara abandon the notch. She moved the instant she saw rounds striking the snow where her torso had been seconds earlier. The remaining flanker had either guessed correctly or gotten lucky. It made no difference. Staying now meant waste. She slid down the reverse side of the rock seam, cut across a shadowed shelf, and came out farther west as friendly reinforcements finally crested into visible range from the outpost. One of the infantrymen below, panting through blood and frost, looked up at the movement and saw her. For the first time all day, the ghost had a shape. A lone white-clad figure rose from the stone with a rifle cradled low, face partly veiled, cheeks streaked dark where a fragment had cut it. She stood against the snow glare like something the mountain itself had decided to reveal only after the killing was over. No one cheered. Men in real shock rarely did. They simply stared. Chief Reed stared longest. He had seen very good shooters in ugly places. He had seen men save fights and lose them. He had seen the difference between talent and command of a battlefield. What he had just watched from Staff Sergeant Mara Vey was not routine excellence. It was something rarer. By the time the helicopters came, the basin had gone strangely quiet. Rotor wash churned old blood into pink mist on the snow and flattened smoke into dirty ribbons across the drifts. Medics moved with brisk, exhausted focus. The dead were covered. The living were strapped, lifted, checked, cursed at, reassured, and loaded. Boots crunched. Metal clinked. No one wasted many words because survival had drained the need for them. The sensor sight still stood. The command bag was intact. The codes had not been taken. The enemy plan lay broken across the mountain in pieces small enough for wind to cover by morning. Colonel Cole arrived with the support element and walked into a reality no briefing language could soften. He saw the wounded being evacuated. He saw the destroyed, ambushed positions on both ridges. He saw the faces of men who had come back because someone had done what his plan had not accounted for. His expression shifted through disbelief, assessment, and something heavier when Reed gave him the shortest version possible. "She warned you." Cole said nothing to that. Recovered enemy materials filled in what Mara had already read in behavior. Portable storage devices, propaganda camera components, route sketches, notes tied to signal exploitation and surveillance blind windows. Their objective had been larger than a patrol hit. Cripple the corridor, seize codes, destroy the site, capture or kill a mixed unit with elite attachments, and turn it into a story for men who loved victory more than truth. In the debrief shelter, with heaters rattling and wet gloves steaming on tabletops, the survivors reconstructed the battle in fragments. The first shot, after we were pinned, took the south spotter, then the sniper, then the runner, then the RPG. Every single one at the exact second it mattered. Chief Reed sat with a bandage on his cheek and listened until the room quieted. Then he looked at Mara, who stood near the wall with her rifle already cleaned enough to be respectful and not enough to be obsessive. "I've seen advanced evaluation lanes built to test target prioritization under stress," he said. "I've seen records men talk about for years after. What you did up their tracks with that level. Maybe past it." Mara did not react much. "We were all there." Reed gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not in the same way." Later, pieces of her file were pulled, and older truths rose where redactions had tried to bury them. A classified mountain interdiction campaign years earlier. Several operations publicly credited to team effects and modeled outcomes that, when read by anyone who understood the language, had clearly been built around one shooter's route selection and long-range decisions. Not glory, not headlines, just influence hidden behind wording. A legend, if one insisted on the word, engineered to remain invisible. Voss found her after the formal debrief ended. He looked younger than he had that morning and older than he had any right to. "Combat did that quickly. I should have listened," he said. Mara looked out through the shelter flap toward the fading light on the ridge. "You listened. You just obeyed someone else. Almost got them killed. Yes. No softness. No cruelty. Just truth." He exhaled and nodded once, accepting it because he had no right to do anything else. "Thank you." She studied him for a second, then gave the barest nod in return. Cole approached after that, shoulders rigid with the effort of carrying rank through humiliation. "Staff Sergeant Vey." "Sir, I owe you an apology." Mara waited. "I dismissed your assessment. I mishandled your request, and I misjudged your role in this operation." It was a formal apology, the kind officers learn to make when facts stripped away their ability to hide behind authority. It was not enough to undo the mourning. It was not enough to return blood to men who had spilled it in the basin. But it was not nothing. Mara could have cut him open with a moment. She did not. "Understood, sir," she said. He seemed almost unsettled by her refusal to punish him further. Only later, in a quieter corner near the communication shelter, did Reed ask the question nobody else had earned. "The leave," he said. Mara looked at the darkening sky a while before answering. "My father was dying." Reed said nothing. "He may already be gone." Her voice remained steady, which somehow made the sentence heavier. "I was trying to make it before the weather closed the route. That changed the shape of the whole day. Not the battle, the woman inside it." Men had mistaken her calm for emotional distance because they preferred simple readings of quiet people. They had been wrong. She was not detached because she felt nothing. She was disciplined because feeling everything all at once would have broken her ability to function when functioning was the only useful gift she had left to give. By evening, the story had already started moving through the outpost in the altered way soldiers tell truth when it has startled them. Not how many shots, not what distance. Those details interested the wrong kinds of listeners. What stayed with the survivors was timing. Every shot arrived exactly when the fight needed it most. Not earlier, not later. Exactly then. There was talk, naturally, of recommendations, commendations, maybe even a path back into a more visible elite role if the buried parts of her record were finally allowed to surface. Mara never answered those suggestions directly. Recognition had a cost. Visibility did too. She had lived long enough in dangerous places to know that being known was not always a prize. When the work was finished, when the helicopters had gone and the mountain had taken back its silence, she stepped outside the outpost alone. The last light turned the snowfields gold at the edges and blue in the shadows. The same ridges that had hidden an ambush now stood still and cold beyond the wire. Somewhere far from there, a room held the loss she had tried to outrun and could not. Somewhere behind her, men were alive because she had stayed. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and looked out over the basin that had almost become a grave for everyone below. No audience, no salute, no speech, just the mountain, the fading light, and a truth that would outlast every report written about that day. In the white silence they had ignored, the deadliest thing on that mountain had been the one soldier they had mistaken for easy to replace.